Hello everyone, welcome back to my video series talking about classic WoW talents for PvP. This is part 3 out of 3 for the Warlock. It's a 3-part series because in classic WoW you can PvP very effectively as all 3 specs of Warlock. When determining your talents you have to think about what kind of playstyle you want to go for. Episode 1 talked about Destruction Warlock, which is the big damage, big burst, low survivability spec for Warlock. Episode 2 discussed Demonology Warlock, which is the high survivability, really hard to kill, but not nearly as much burst spec for Warlocks. In this episode, we're talking about Affliction Warlock, which I like to think of as a hybrid between the two, because you have more burst than Demonology due to having Nightfall, Shadowburn, and Ruin, but not as much as Destruction because you don't have talents like Conflagrate. But on the other hand, you have more survivability than a spec like Destruction because you have talents like Siphon Life, and you're draining more often with Fell Concentration, Nightfall, and Shadow Master, making that drain life more powerful. But you don't have talents like Soul Link to make you super tanky. Affliction is a very fun spec. It's like kind of a hybrid playstyle, and I do enjoy it a lot. There's not a whole lot of variation in the talents, but we're going to discuss that as we get there. But the main idea is you're getting Shadow Mastery, and then you're putting the rest of your points in Destruction for Ruin for the big crits. But without further ado, let's get into the talents. So this is going to be a PvP focused discussion, but I'm also going to discuss PvE as well, because you'll see a lot of Warlocks with having dual spec in Classic WoW. They'll have their raiding spec, which you can raid as SM Ruin very well. It's only a hair worse than DS Ruin. And then you could have another spec. For instance, my Warlock has SM Ruin for raiding, and you can PvP as well. And then I have Conflag for my PvP only spec. But first we're going to discuss just PvP, and then we'll talk about PvE a little bit later on. But let's get into the talents. So with Affliction, obviously you need Improved Corruption. Every Warlock takes this. It makes your Corruption instant cast. No Warlock spec doesn't take this. Moving down, you have Improved Life Tap. Very good talent, helping with your sustainability. And then we need to spend 3 more points to move down to some of the good stuff down here. You really have 2 options. You can go for Improved Drain Life or Suppression. I typically go for Suppression, even though you do still want to gear for hit. I find this more valuable for helping with a lot of Phase 1 gear doesn't have hit, so helping with getting hit cap right away currently, and people who are like stacking shadow resistance on you. I find it more valuable than the minuscule 2% more health from drain life per talent point. Though this is not an awful talent, you could go like this if you're gearing for hit. But for now, let's put it here and keep moving forward. On the next row, Amplified Curse is a nice talent. You do get Curse of Exhaustion with this spec, so this you can use it for Curse of Exhaustion or your Curse of Agony, but on a 3-minute cooldown, it just really beefs up those curses. 50% on Agony and 20% on Exhaustion, making them just that much more effective. Next, we have Improved Curse of Agony and Fell Concentration. Improved Curse of Agony may sound good because you're dotting a lot in this spec, but the 2% only refers to the base damage. It does not scale with spell power at all. So for that reason, each point really just gives you a very little amount of damage. So I would certainly go for Fell Concentration, 5 out of 5. You're draining a fair amount in the spec, and this just allows you to do that much more effectively. Next, moving down, 2 very good talents. Grim Reach, giving you that increased range, and then Nightfall. This really helps with your burst damage. You're throwing Corruption up on a lot of targets, you're draining a fair amount, you're going to get a pretty good amount of Nightfall procs, and this is what really gives you that burst because you don't have talents like Conflagrate. Then moving down, Siphon Life, a very good dot, just helps with survivability and damage. And then next, Curse of Exhaustion. You may find yourself using this a lot, or very little. I don't use it all that often, but it is nice to have for trying to keep melee off you or keep people from running away. It's a good talent, but it's kind of the mark of a good Warlock, whether you know when it's appropriate to Curse of Exhaustion instead of just like Agony for damage. But then what we really want is Shadow Mastery, so we need to spend 3 more points. You have a pretty good amount of variety of options you can choose. Typically, I see most people going for Improved Curse of Exhaustion, 3 points. Just without this talent, without Amplify, this 10% movement speed is really like not doing much for you. You do want this Improved Curse of Exhaustion if you find yourself using Curse of Exhaustion a lot. But that's not the only option, and we're going to discuss that once we finish the talents. So then 5 out of 5 Shadow Mastery, very nice, just increasing your shadow damage by 10%, and you're primarily using shadow spells in this spec. And then we have 21 points, all of which need to go into Destruction if we want Ruin. So first we have to choose between Proof Shadow Wall and Cataclysm. Cataclysm just reduces the mana cost of your Destruction spells, not super useful. We're going Proof Shadow Bolt. It pairs very well with that Nightfall talent. So if you get a crit, then you can follow up with Shadow Burn or Death Coil, and that's going to be doing increased damage, 20% increased damage. Next, we have Bane and Aftermath. Aftermath is decent, but you're not casting a whole lot of destruction spells, and unless you're maxing it out, it really doesn't happen very often. You definitely want Bane, reducing the casting time of your Shadow Bolt, Immolate, and Soulfire. Very good talent to have. Then we get Shadow Burn. Awesome talent, 15-second cooldown, instant cast shadow damage, really helps with the burst. Then moving further down, we get Devastation, because we need Ruin, but also 5% crit, definitely not bad. Destructive Reach helps with that the range, particularly on Shadow Burn. It's only 20-yard range baseline, so this increases to 24 yards, which you still have to be kind of close, but without Destructive Reach, you really have to be like right on your opponent, it seems like. And then we need to spend 2 more points. You could go Intensity, but I really wouldn't. You don't really find yourself casting a lot of Rain of Fire, Hellfire, and you only cast Soulfire really if you have a target like Seduced, or if you're playing with a mage if it's in a sheep or something. So I would just put those points in Improved Searing Pain. You're not using Searing Pain very often at all, but sometimes you're kicked on Shadow, you need to cast Fire, and this is what you're going to want to cast, especially if a melee's on you. It's going to be more effective than casting Immolate, even though Immolate does more damage. The PvP gloves give you that 50% knockback reduction, makes it much easier to cast this. And then the final point is going into Ruin. This is why this spec can be pretty bursty. Even though you kind of think of it as like a dot spec, you can still get a lot of burst with those Nightfall procs, Shadow Burn, and then Ruin, making all that a lot more powerful when you crit. So this is what I would say is the main default Affliction talents, but what wiggle room is there? You can change a few things around, so I'm going to discuss that now. So the Destruction talents, the only real wiggle room is Improved Searing Pain. You could go Intensity if you want, or like 2 out of 5 Aftermath, but that's not super important. What's more interesting is the Affliction talents. So like I was kind of saying before, if you don't find yourself using Curse of Exhaustion ever really, then these 3 points aren't really useful. So you could go for a couple other things. You could put a few points into Improved Drain Life. That's not bad, helping your drain get a little bit better. Improved Drain Mana isn't awful either, giving your drain mana some damage as well. But I really only find myself using this in dueling environments against like healers. Very seldom in like open world PvP am I really draining mana a whole lot. And if I am, do I really need a little bit of damage? Not super impactful. So that's an option, but I wouldn't necessarily go for it. If we're talking strictly PvP, you really don't need any more points in suppression than this. Even this is not 100% necessary. Proof Curse of Agony, like I said, it's not giving you a whole lot, But if you don't want to prove Curse of Exhaustion, I mean, it's 6% extra damage on the base agony. It's not awful. But those are really the choices you can make with those 3 points if you like. If you're really crazy, you can even drop Curse of Exhaustion and have another point, but I wouldn't. I mean, it's only 1 point. It's worth having. But now let's discuss. So this is going to be slightly off topic of PvP, but like I alluded to before, you can raid very effectively as SM Ruin. So personally on my Warlock, I have SM Ruin and then I have Deep Destro. So my SM Ruin is my raiding spec, so it's not 100% built for PvP, but there's just a few talent points changed around, and you can still PvP very effectively. So if you like to mess around with 2 PvP specs, kind of like I do, there's a couple changes you should probably make. So let's talk about that. So personally on my Warlock, my SM Ruin build is as follows. I do not get points in improved Curse of Exhaustion. I instead put 2 of those points in Suppression, and then 1 point in improved Drain Soul. And then actually one more change I make is instead of improved Searing Pain, I go for Intensity, just for when I'm Hellfiring in raid. This can help a little bit. So this is my raiding SM Ruin spec with PvP in mind as well. So I have 10% hit on my Affliction spells, which is really nice because there's so little hit gear right now. And then I like the 1 point improved Drain Soul. It's not absolutely mandatory, but this is also the spec I use usually when I'm out in the world just farming, killing mobs. So this helps with my mana sustainability. And for 1 point, I mean, what else are you going to put it in? Like 1 point improved Drain Life or 1 in Curse of Exhaustion. I find value in this, even though it's kind of a meme talent. I do like it. But now, so that's really the SM Ruin build, right? So let's just go back to the strictly PvP thing. So that's 3 points here, 2 out of here, 1 out of there. Bam, back to PvP, full PvP. Now this other spec I'm going to go over is not super. I've never played it. This is just a theorycraft thing, and it might not be any good, but something I was kind of thinking about trying. I've never tried it, but I'm going to talk about it after I put the talents in real quick. So starting off, we're kind of just going over the basic Affliction stuff that we had before, and then Destro. Now this kind of theorycraft thing is if you really find yourself dotting a lot of targets, like in an AV, if you're just dotting everyone up and you're not really ever casting Shadow Bolt for the burst. You should, but if you're not, very niche situation, I might consider not getting Ruin, because you're spending these other like 10 points on not super useful things to get Ruin, and if you're kind of just dotting everyone, your dots can't crit. Definitely still take Shadowburn, but I was kind of theory crafting, what if I got Dark Pact, which is a nice talent. It's basically life tap, but you don't lose health, because your pets aren't really going so it's just free mana anytime you have a global. This is a nice talent. And then I really do like these talents in Demonology, these starting talents, increasing your stamina by 15%, and better health stone. It's very nice. And then you still have 2 points left. You can go for several things. What I would go for is probably just finishing off this and getting 1 point in whatever you want, like improved Drain Soul or something. Or maybe even 2 out of 3 improved Voidwalker to make your shield a fair amount more powerful. But like I said, this is kind of just a theorycraft, kind of a meme spec that I've never played it, but I was kind of just thinking about it and I wanted to mention it. I don't know if anyone else has ever played a spec like this, Deep Affliction with Shadowburn and these survivability talents, but you're missing out on Ruin, so your burst is going to be a lot lower. But if, like I said, if you're kind of just dotting everyone up, this might be a decent alternative. But overall, this really is the SM Ruin spec. Like I said before, if you want to raid as well, it's as simple as finishing out suppression, point and drain soul if you like, or whatever you want, and then Shadow Mastery. All you're really losing is that proof curse of exhaustion to make this a viable raiding spec. But yeah, I hope you enjoy the video and stay tuned for my next series. I'm done with this Warlock series, but there's more videos to come.